Hello, everyone, and thank you for logging in for today's webinar. My name is Lauren, and I'm the Adult Programs Coordinator here at the National Museum of the Pacific War. And as you can see, today I am joined in studio with our speaker. Say hi, John.
Hey, nice to be here. Great to be here, in fact.
Yes, we're very excited to have you here as well. And I've already told you, I love to see where people are streaming in from. So I know a lot of our friends are already letting us know where they're streaming in from. So we'll go ahead and give a few shout outs while we wait for some of our other friends to join us. So
Dayton, Ohio.
Okay, we see Ohio. I see Virginia. Hello,
Yeah,
Virginia.
Medford, Oregon.
That's very specific.
Yeah.
Medford, Oregon.
Medford, Oregon.
I think I see California here with us, and Washington.
San Juan Island.
Yeah. We had earlier, I noticed somebody from Mobile, Alabama, so I don't want to leave them out. You were like one of the first ones.
Hawaii.
And Hawaii.
I did see that.
Thank you for joining us today.
Yes.
We're really happy to have everybody here with us today, but the star of the show is you. So I'm going to go ahead and hand the reins over to you.
Sounds good.
Everybody enjoy.
All right. Okay, so I want to talk about the final year at war for Chester Nimitz, because among other things, I think that at 80 years removed, we sort of have this image of the military mismatch between the Americans and the Japanese is such that we are marching triumphantly and inexorably towards the defeat of Japan. And I would actually like to paint a slightly more nuanced picture, which is that in many ways, 1945 is the most challenging year of the war. And I think that a lot of the senior officers within the American military by this time are extremely tired, in many cases pretty stressed out. And I think you can build a sort of a circumstantial case around that being the case for Chester Nimitz as well. So I'm going to start in January of 1945. And the first thing that ends up happening there towards the end of the month is that Nimitz moves his headquarters from Pearl Harbor out to Guam. At this point, he's been spending a lot of his time entertaining bigwigs in Pearl Harbor. You know, senators are coming out, labor leaders are coming out, industrial leaders are coming out, and he's got a war to run. And so he believes that if he could just move his headquarters over to Guam, another 4,000 miles towards the front, that he's going to be in much better position to actually run that war. Among other things, too, he'll have less to deal with in terms of time zone changes and that sort of thing. So on the 26th of January, he gets on the Pink Lady, as she's called, and the next day he ends up in Guam. So here he is debarking. So this is the headquarters complex. This is still known today as Nimitz Hill on Guam. And this is sort of a panorama of the entire headquarters complex. And you can see the senior officers' quarters are up on the right-hand side of the slide. And Nimitz's quarters are here in the upper right. And I love the fact that if you zoom in even tighter, one of the things that you can see about Nimitz's quarters that is he has his horseshoe pitch, which he uses religiously on an almost daily basis. He's out there pitching horseshoes, or he's often down at the shooting range as well, just to kind of blow off some steam and get his mind off of the war. He's got a very nice house. It has a lovely lanai. Here's a picture of him with some of his senior officers enjoying the afternoon. He writes that, you know, we assemble for old fashions at 6:30 p.m. on our lanai, with its wonderful view over the Western Pacific. Unfortunately for Chester, just moving his headquarters 4,000 miles further to the east does not, or the west actually, does not make for insulation from all of these VIPs. And it turns out that a lot of them are perfectly cheerful to tack on that extra plane flight or two, and they end up coming out to Guam in any case. So here's a picture of Nimitz greeting a group of labor leaders and shaking hands with them, letting them know how the war is going. His boss, Secretary of the Navy, James Forrestal, likewise, is coming out for a visit. So this is an ongoing problem for him. And meantime, of course, he does actually have a war to run. So if we get to February 1945, just a couple weeks after he actually has set up his headquarters, we kick off the Battle of Iwo Jima. And that begins on the 19th of February. Here's a picture of the landing beaches, a very famous photo. And that's going to result in about a month's worth of incredibly bloody combat. And by the end of that, the Japanese garrison of 21,000 will have been completely wiped out. About 375 killed in action. There are actually still a couple thousand or more that are going to be left alive on the island, but are going to be mopped up after the main combat is over. The Americans, meanwhile, lose 26,000 casualties, including over 6,800 killed in action. And that means that a Japanese garrison that was outnumbered 5-1 by the Americans still managed to hold out for about 35 days. And this is also the first instance where the Americans have suffered a sub 1-to-1 casualty ratio in the Pacific War. And obviously, if you're a guy in Nimitz's billet, you're looking at those trend lines with grave concern, because that is not a healthy trend line if you're thinking down the road that you might actually have to do an invasion of Japan. So here's a picture of Nimitz on top of Mount Suribachi in March of 1945. You can also see Admiral Spruance in the little pith helmet here, just to the left of that. Almost as soon as the combat in Iwo Jima is done, we kick off the invasion of Okinawa on 1 April 1945. So here's a picture of the battleship, I believe that's the Tennessee, with a group of Amtraks churning into the landing beaches. And this is going to kick off 81 days of absolutely savage combat, mostly centered on the Shuri Line, which is in the middle of the southern portion of the island. And it's just going to be a complete and total meat grinder. I love this quote from Time magazine: the combat that we're experiencing in Okinawa is 1 foot at a time against the sort of savage, rat-in-a-hole defense that only the Japanese can offer. And having been to Okinawa, I can tell you that that is absolutely right on the money. Meanwhile, offshore, while this ground battle is grinding ahead, the Japanese unleash a massive series of kamikaze attacks against the American invasion fleet, which leads to a multi-month ordeal for the U.S. Navy as well. There are numerous hits against some of our fleet carriers. Here's the carrier Bunker Hill afire after being attacked. I love this photo of the USS Enterprise hit by a kamikaze. The bomb detonates 6 decks underneath the flight deck and launches the forward elevator 400 feet into the air. And this is actually going to knock Enterprise out of the war. She won't be repaired until September. Meanwhile, out on the radar picket stations that are surrounding our fleet area and the anchorage near Okinawa, the destroyer pickets that are out in that neck of the woods are just being absolutely savaged. So here's a picture of the Erin Ward after her ordeal. USS Hazelwood has her bridge completely smashed, killing the captain and a number of other senior officers. And the battleship Colorado is hit as well on 12 May. And this is actually Admiral Spruance's flagship. Spruance was at this moment almost about to ascend a ladder up to the bridge when the warning sirens goes off and he decides to take shelter, which is fortunate for him, because had he gone ahead and started going up that ladder, it's likely that he would have ended up a casualty. And so he gives this relatively understated comment afterwards that the suicide plane is a very effective weapon, one which we must not underestimate. And yeah, Raymond Spruance at that point ought to know. The result for the U.S. Navy is a lot of body bags and a lot of injured personnel, constant burials at sea, meaning that when Spruance finally turns over command of the fleet to Halsey on the 27th of May, and here they are on the Colorado actually making that transfer, you can almost see in Spruance's face that he's a very tired man. And Nimitz makes the comment that when Spruance comes back to Guam and is hanging out, recuperating really in the housing that Nimitz provides for him, that it seems pretty clear that Spruance's normally zen-like calm has been really frayed. He is exhausted by the ordeal that he's been through with the fleet. Meanwhile, back in the American press, people are looking at what's going on Okinawa and are unhappy with how that battle is progressing. In fact, there are some sort of muckraking journalists who are saying that this whole thing is a debacle, that there should be a court of inquiry, et cetera, prompting Nimitz to actually hold a press conference on Guam to publicly refute those statements. Because understand that Nimitz is the theater commander in charge of the Okinawa operation. Even though he is an admiral, he is in charge of a ground army, 10th Army, which is composed of both Army and Marine troops. And so it's Nimitz that then stands up and says these articles are irresponsible. And the people that are writing these articles in many cases don't seem to be acting in the best interests of the United States. That's pretty strong words from a fairly understated guy like Nimitz. The final butcher's bill on Okinawa is going to be a garrison there of 100,000 Japanese troops is almost completely wiped out. 75,000 American casualties, including more than 12,500 killed in action, and enormous civilian casualties as well, between 100 and 150,000 Okinawan civilians. The numbers are very squishy here, but it seems somewhere between a third and a half of the Okinawan civilian population was killed as a result of this battle. For the USN, you got 36 ships sunk, another 386 damaged, over 5,000 killed, and around 5,000 wounded in action as well. When I think of 1945, too, I think to an extent that Nimitz was actually also involved in what you might think of as a two-front war, and one front is against the Japanese and the other front is against Douglas MacArthur. Because as these twin offensives are beginning to converge closer and closer to Japan, the dividing lines between the command areas are becoming more and more blurred, and MacArthur really wants to assert as much command and control over the entirety of the Pacific at this point that he can. So Nimitz asks for a conference to discuss not only the upcoming invasion of Japan, but also command arrangements and that sort of thing. And MacArthur says, well, I'm far too busy to leave my headquarters in Manila, and instead sends a party of his senior officers over to Guam to sort of chew these matters over. And it's led by this individual, Major General Richard Sutherland, who is MacArthur's chief of staff. Sutherland is the equivalent of human sandpaper. He is absolutely annoying and arrogant and overbearing, and anybody who comes into contact with this guy on an extended basis just wants to murder him at the end of that contact. Nimitz has formidable diplomatic skills, though, and has certainly met Sutherland before, but this meeting does not go well, because Sutherland comes in with a list of demands from his boss that he wants Nimitz to turn over command of all of the Army units that are currently under Nimitz's command, such as on Okinawa. He wants the Army and Navy logistics to be decoupled, and that in and of itself prompts some of Nimitz's staff members to say that, you know, the notion of trying to disentangle Army and Navy logistics is like trying to unscramble eggs. Because at this point, the Navy, of course, is hauling all of the logistics around for the two services, but the Army in many cases is providing base facilities and that sort of thing. So they are really intertwined at this point in the war, and Nimitz thinks it's just a terrible idea to try to drag them apart. So the net result is that when Sutherland comes in with this list of demands, Nimitz says no. And he says no so firmly that a lot of his staffers, who again are used to a pretty conciliatory guy, are really left sort of slack-jawed by this. That night, Nimitz sends off a very lengthy cable to his boss, Admiral King, just kind of reprising what's gone on during this day worth of meetings. And he points out that the essential garrisons of all positions in the Pacific area must remain under my operational control as long as I'm responsible for those areas. Likewise, abolition of unity of command in the sub-areas and underlying or outlying islands would produce chaos and would retard the prosecution of the war. He says, therefore, I shall not accede now to his assuming operational control. And then down at the bottom says, the foregoing is to keep you personally informed. In other words, I don't want you to get blindsided in a Joint Chiefs meeting if MacArthur goes crying to General Marshall that this is going on. So I'm letting you know what's happening. And before the next morning's meetings kick off, King immediately fires back a response. I am in complete agreement with your views expressed in your cable. At that point, Nimitz, now armed with the backing of arguably the most effective bureaucratic infighter in Washington, D.C., his boss, goes back to Sutherland and says, I will not transfer any shore positions from me to you. I will not relinquish control of any Army units. I will not assume control of the 7th Fleet, which is currently under MacArthur. I will continue to exercise control over all major forces in my area, and I will retain control of logistics. At that point, he tries to bring the meeting around to a discussion of invasion plans for Japan, and is forced to admit the following evening in another cable to King that very little useful discussion has taken place concerning these invasion plans because the Southwest Pacific Area Party was apparently not prepared for such a discussion. In other words, the only reason that Sutherland came out here was to try to do a land grab. So at the conclusion of this very unimpressive meeting, basically Nimitz ushers Sutherland and his party back to their planes and sends them on their way back to Manila. That brings us to June of 1945, which starts off with a typhoon. And Halsey runs his fleet into a typhoon off of the Ryukyus. And in the course of that, the cruiser Pittsburgh is going to lose her bow, among other things. And the fleet is going to be pretty severely beaten up. A number of the aircraft carriers are taking green water over their flight decks. And it's pretty tough to run flight operations off an aircraft carrier when you have your flight deck bent down like a bloody nose like that. And this would not necessarily be such a bad thing if this was the first typhoon that Halsey had run a fleet into, but it in fact is the second, because the worst of the two was actually back in December 1944 when he ran into Typhoon Cobra, which resulted in the sinking of 3 destroyers, the loss of over 700 sailors. And that's not a good look. And at this point, a board of inquiry is convened to talk about this particular incident and recommends that both Halsey and McCain be assigned to other duties. This prompts a little bit of a crisis on the part of Nimitz and also his boss, King, and it forces Nimitz to step in and save Halsey's job. Basically, he makes the argument that if we switch horses at this point of the war, it's going to be bad for morale, and it would be a morale boost for the Japanese. And so even though Halsey arguably should have been put out to pasture at this point, Nimitz steps in and keeps him in command, and it's McCain that is going to be the scapegoat for this whole incident. We get to July of 1945. We've been talking about this upcoming American invasion. What ends up happening in the intervening months from about January to July of 45 is we become aware of the fact that the Japanese are pushing in an incredible number of troops into Kyushu. So by the time you get to July, they now have more than 900,000 troops in that island and more than 10,000 planes, the majority of whom are slated for kamikaze attacks, are going to be resisting that invasion. And that means that the Japanese forces on the island actually outnumber what we can bring to the party, which is about 750,000. Nimitz already had been pretty leery of doing an invasion even as far back as May of 1945, but around this time, King asks Nimitz directly for his evaluation of, what do you think we should do in this case? Nimitz doesn't give him a direct answer. There should be a sort of a come to Jesus meeting that's going to be kicking off in early August. That ends up never taking place as a result of Japan's surrender from the usage of the atomic bombs. But it's clear at this point that Nimitz is really concerned that if I have to park an invasion fleet off these invasion beaches and the Japanese go after my attack transports with those kamikazes, it's just going to be another absolute bloodbath. So as I say, Nimitz is no longer behind this, and I don't know what would have happened as a result of that come to Jesus meeting. My money is always on Admiral King in matters such as that. But again, the strategic picture is not one of we are marching inexorably towards victory here. It is one of, oh my gosh, if we actually have to do this invasion, we're going to pay inordinately heavy casualties in order to do that. The war is getting bloodier and bloodier and harder the longer it goes on. Which means that when Nimitz finally does get to the surrender ceremony, I'm sure that he was inwardly breathing a huge sigh of relief. Of course, no meeting between where MacArthur is involved would be complete without at least some measure of controversy. So when MacArthur comes aboard the Missouri for the surrender ceremony, he makes it clear that he expects his flag as commander-in-chief of the occupation forces to be hoisted on the yardarm of the Missouri. And that goes against Navy regulations, particularly because there is a Navy 5-star who is co-equal in rank to MacArthur, who is also going to be at this ceremony. The compromise that gets reached is that they will hoist both of their flags up the lanyards. My guess is that they probably kept Nimitz's an inch or two above MacArthur's because this is a Navy ship, thank you very much. But in any case, here's a picture of the two of them marching towards the surrender ceremony. So here's a picture from some of the footage from that. You can see Foreign Minister Shigemitsu with his wooden leg making his way towards the surrender table. The Japanese general in the back there is Umezu, who will be signing for the Japanese army. Here is the Japanese party being told precisely where to stand for this ceremony. And then finally, once the Japanese are in place, MacArthur and Nimitz come up side by side. You can see Halsey trailing behind as they make their way to the surrender ceremony. And actually, I think the guy who's just coming up the walkway here, that's probably Sutherland. Here is Nimitz signing for the US of A, and behind him, he's got both Halsey and Ted Sherman, his chief of staff. I think one of the things that sort of marks Nimitz as a man is how he comports himself in the face of the surrender. He immediately issues an order to his officers that now, with the termination of hostilities against Japan, it is incumbent on all officers to conduct themselves with dignity and decorum in their treatment of the Japanese. I think that's a real testament to the sort of person that he was. And I thank you very much for your attention. Let's do some Q&A.
All right, I'm back.
You are back.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Okay, so now for everybody's favorite part, the Q&A. I know you love Q&A. So let's see what questions we have. Our first question that we have is, my late husband was U.S. Navy at
Subic Bay.
Thank you.
Yep.
In 1945, awaiting orders for Operation Downfall. The Japanese surrender changed this, of course, and thus my husband spent the last year of his 4 years hitching at Crossroads?
At Crossroads, which is the atomic tests and that sort of thing. So,
okay.
So yeah, glad that he got out of it. I wanted to answer Bernard Cole too. Great picks, but I thought this was about Japan's decision making. That was actually last night. Sorry. I was asked to do a separate webinar for today, so the broadcast of last night's podcast is going to be out there very shortly. Yeah. Friday.
It'll be available Friday, so don't worry. We recorded everything that Jon has done with us.
Many more words, many more pictures. It'll all be there for you. So.
Let's see. Do we have another question? Yes. How in 1945 was Japan able to amass such a large force in Kyushu?
They have been raising new legions, if you will, in Japan proper. At this point, they're kind of cut off from the mainland, and there was no ability to get major units of the Kwantung Army out of Manchuria. Among other things, too, they couldn't really move that many out of Manchuria because they had to guard against a Soviet invasion, which does end up happening on the 9th of August. So most of those forces that are in Japan have been raised within Japan and hastily trained and armed with whatever they can arm them with. So yeah, that's the story there. It's all domestically raised.
Okay.
Yeah. Arguably the worst decision Nimitz made in the war was going ahead with the invasion of Peleliu. He could have invaded Iwo Jima. Yep. Absolutely. A great counterfactual. What would have happened if we had not invaded Peleliu and instead had gone ahead and gone on to Iwo Jima earlier? There's a lot of Monday morning quarterback that goes on with that. And I do agree with that statement, actually. I do think that is Nimitz's worst moment in the war from a command and control standpoint. I think that we have difficulty remembering that once you get the machinery of war stoked up, I mean, the distances in the Pacific are just so vast that these invasion convoys were already in motion, in many cases weeks before. And so to sort of pull the rug out from underneath the decision that's already been made and a commitment that's kind of been made to MacArthur that we are going to invade this island, made it a difficult time to kind of pivot. I do think he should have pivoted, that would have been the better decision. But in the event, they do end up going and invading Peleliu and wrecking the 1st Marine Division in the process of doing that. Thomas Mayer, how do you see a land invasion playing out? I read there was a plan to move the Emperor to a mountain facility and arm the civilians with bamboo spears and grenades to bleed the Allies. That's basically all true. On March 1st, 1945, the Japanese Diet passed a law which basically erased the median line between civilians and soldiers. Basically, every able-bodied man between the ages of 15 and 60, and every able-bodied woman between 17 and 40 was now a member of the Auxiliary Corps, and those units were attached to whatever Army unit happened to be closest to them. They have no uniforms. They, in many cases, are armed not even with firearms, but yes, as you say, with bamboo spears or a grenade or anything, a knife. So you can imagine the problem from an American trooper's standpoint, coming ashore on these invasion beaches, and how do I distinguish a civilian from a soldier? Is that woman who is charging out of that house in a kimono, is she just trying to get away from the crossfire, or does she have a grenade there that she's going to try to use against me? So how do I think the land invasion would have gone? I think it would have been incredibly bloody and awful. I have a tremendous respect for American firepower at that point in the war. I do think that we would have gotten ashore successfully, but I think our casualties would have been just horrific. And I think that Japanese civilian casualties likewise would have been terrifyingly large. There's 11 million people on Kyushu. Even if you posit that you're only going to take over the southern half of that island, there's probably 4 or 5 million civilians that are now going to be in the way of these American forces. If you look at the analogs from places like Saipan and Okinawa, I think you can make a case that you're going to kill at least a third of those people. That's millions of dead civilians. It would have been an absolute bloodbath.
We have a whole lot of questions coming in.
Let's do it.
All right. Next one. How much did the U.S. leadership know about the Japanese Kitsugo strategy?
There's a real lag time between when we can identify those units that are being pushed into Kyushu and when they actually sort of show up on the intelligence radar screen, if you will. You've got to be able to detect those units in many cases through radio traffic and that sort of thing, photographic analysis. And so, a month or two could be the normal delay cycle. That slide that I showed there was the sort of the situation on the ground in July. We didn't know that all of those forces were necessarily there yet, but enough had shown up on the radar screen that there was already a lot of red flags going up in places like Guam and DC. So,
okay, all right. Some of you guys write very detailed questions.
I love that.
So, you want to read this one?
Yeah, sure. There were 1 million Japanese troops in China at the end. Did they surrender easily? Did we send troops there to oversee the repatriations? Yes, and yes. We got incredibly lucky. There was an active concern that even if the emperor made the decision to go ahead and surrender, that garrisons in outlying locations, and particularly in China, would not necessarily lay down their arms. And some of the Japanese military leaders likewise were saying exactly the same thing, that if you look at the statements of Navy Minister Yonai, he says that the most difficult moments I had as Navy Minister were between August 15th and about August 22nd. So, the emperor has now done his surrender broadcast. He's, we're done. But there's a lot of message traffic that's going out from Tokyo to these army units saying, you will lay down your arms, you will surrender when called upon. And eventually they did bring them into line. But yeah, there were a lot of very uptight people. We then did use any surviving Japanese warships. There were a couple of carriers that could be used, and we used American ships too, I believe, to then repatriate as many of these Japanese soldiers as possible. That process took years. So there were a lot of troops and Japanese civilians over there as well.
Okay. Yeah. All right, next one up. Not directly related. I have read that when Yamamoto was killed, he was about to be relieved of his command. Is this true?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think so, but I could be wrong. So you've stumped the chump.
Yes.
Good on it. Yep. Next question, please.
Okay, next one. In addition to the enormous Japanese buildup in Kyushu, my readings tell me that they also had
had predicted our invasion beaches. Absolutely. Yeah, they had. If you look at a map of Kyushu, there's just not that many places that offer the kind of beach real estate, if you will, to put an invasion force on. And so it did not take a rocket scientist to figure out where we were going to be coming. And so they had built water's edge defenses at all of those locations.
Gotcha. So it made sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Totally.
All right.
Why Kyushu?
Why Kyushu is the next one.
So the whole predication for this invasion, we're actually looking at a two-part invasion, because we want to make an operation happen under the umbrella of our land-based air power, which is all going to be based out of Okinawa. That's the reason we grabbed Okinawa, was because we can put air bases on it, which can project air power on Japan for the invasion that we're going to do there. But our fighters won't reach all the way up to Tokyo, which is the ultimate goal. And so the notion is that we're going to grab Kyushu, southern Kyushu, turn that into a series of air bases that now gives us the stepping stone that we need to project air power up over the Kanto plain, where Tokyo and Yokosuka and those places are all located. So it was a two-part operation, and that's why Kyushu was grabbed for air bases.
Okay. Next one. Can you tell the story about one signer signing on the wrong line and almost derailing the surrender agreement?
Right. I'm trying to remember exactly who. I think it was the Canadian representative put his signature on the wrong line. That was detected. I think it was actually Sutherland who figures that out. And then when the next person comes up to sign, Sutherland is like, no, you sign here. And we just we pivoted. That's kind of what it comes down to.
They found a way to make it work.
Yes, they made it work.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, next one is a long one. Why don't you read it?
All right, here we go. What was the effect of the B-29 mining and the submarine attacks on the supply of food to the home islands? Many have been said the winter of 45-46 would have resulted in mass starvation. Without the atomic bombs, could the U.S. sit and starve Japan into surrender? I think the answer to that is 3 yeses in a row. The mining campaign in particular made it almost impossible for, actually don't get rid of that one yet, because I'm going to need to go back and actually look at it. The mining campaign had clogged up Japan's harbors with damaged ships, and so their ability to move things back and forth between the Korean peninsula and into the inland sea was like vernished at this point. So that was a real problem for them. Yes, there was going to be starvation if the war continued through the winter of 45-46. And the Big Six, who were running Japan at this time, understood that implicitly. When they signed that law in March of 45 saying that, all the civilians are now basically, semi-pro soldiers, it was also understood that if the war continued, there was going to be mass starvation in Japan to the tune of probably 5 to 10 million people. And that was fine with them. So, any evaluation of, was it right to drop the bomb or not, I think has to factor in that if we hadn't done that, could we have sat back and starved them out? Yeah, we could have. And it would have been really, really grotesque, and it would have resulted in the deaths of millions more Japanese than actually was the case with just dropping the bomb and getting the war over with now. not to mention all of the widespread death that was going on in greater Asia. There are still, the numbers are squishy, pick what you want, but between 500 and 700,000 Asians are dying every month as a result of this war. And 75 to 80% of those are allied civilians in places like China, Indonesia, and North Vietnam. So the longer this war goes on, the worse it is for everybody. And while we could have brought Japan to its knees using other methods than the bomb was the quickest, most efficacious way to get the war over with, and that was good for everybody. It was the least bad solution.
Okay. Can we scroll up a little bit? Sorry, we have a cheat sheet of the questions for you guys. Okay. So what were the capabilities of IJA and IJN Air Force, considering Japan was cut off of resources, especially fuel?
Yeah. A lot of these planes are dedicated for kamikaze operations, and so you only need enough gasoline for a one-way mission. And in many cases, these are going to be aircraft that would be used against invasion fleets, which are just right offshore, so you don't need a lot of gasoline to do that. It is true that they were no longer capable of really doing normal operations by the end of the war. Their flight training programs have all been completely cut back. And so they weren't really operable air forces in any normal sense of the word, but they were certainly going to be capable of offering resistance at the point of attack if an invasion actually goes in.
Okay. All right, we have 3 questions left. Is there a complete list of all USN ships somewhere that was present for the surrender?
Yeah, I don't know. And I'm actually very interested in that question myself. I was just at another symposium at another museum, and I was looking at actually at my thank you slide, which shows this flyover, and I'm looking at those ships. I'm like, that's a Marblehead class cruiser. I wonder which one that is. And so I'm sure that list exists out there someplace. That's actually something I kind of like to dig into, but I know that there are books on that subject. I'm sure it's out there. I don't have it on my person at this point. So there you go.
It can be found.
It can be found.
Yes. Okay, next one. I read a statement that instead of losing the population of 2 cities to atomic bombs, Japan would have lost an entire population.
Again, I think, if the war continues going through the winter of 45, 46, even without an invasion, I think the Japanese are looking at between 5 and 10 million additional dead. If the invasion actually happens, I think you're looking at another 2 to 3, 4 million just in Kyushu alone. And if it goes up to the Kanto Plain, your guess is as good as mine. But I've run sort of spreadsheet exercises on this topic, and you can come away with nightmare scenarios where between the additional body count in Japan, the additional body count in places like China and Tonkin, that if the war had come to a series of invasions to conquer Japan, you could have seen an extra 16 million people, maybe 20 million people killed in the context of a war that already has killed between 60 and 75 million. It's absolutely horrific.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, our next one is, what's the best book to understand Japan's command decision-making in 1945?
Rich Frank's Downfall. Hands down, that's the go-to, and should be in my bag over there. So yeah, I would recommend that wholeheartedly. DM John Greco's Hell to Pay likewise goes into great detail on their planning for the actual defense of the beaches. So.
Okay, we have another one, and I'm really curious about your answer on this one too. So are there any movies that you could recommend concerning this topic?
You have stumped the chump again. No, as I think about it. Not off the top of my head. I hear the recent Godzilla movie is really good, though.
It is.
Okay, I haven't seen it.
It is.
But yeah, I don't have an answer for that one.
And I will take this moment to do a slight plug for our conference.
Yes.
Because our conference coming up in October is about pop culture, propaganda, and politics. And one of our presenters will be presenting on Godzilla as it relates to World War II and his emergence out of it. Yes.
Okay.
So if you guys are interested in more topics like this, please check out our website for conference details. It is October 17th and 18th.
Excellent.
Thank you again for joining us, and thank you, Jon, for being here today.
Thanks for having me. It's been a blast.